And good evening, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Current Events on Tap, a podcast brought to you by the Alex Kirsch Project, where they like the drinks, the current events are on the house. And I'm your host, Alex Kirsch, pragmatic progressive, U.S. Army veteran, truck driver, gamer, and streamer. If this is your first time on the show, please do not forget to hit like, share, comment, and subscribe. And we are currently streaming live on YouTube, Twitch, and the X platform, and now even on TikTok, for as long as TikTok may remain. Now, the format of this show is simple. I bring on one or more guests to the show. We talk beer or beverage of choice and current events of the week. Each person will discuss their beverage of choice for this hour, whether it's alcoholic or non-alcoholic, it does not matter. Then each person will cover two current events of their choosing. They give their current event, they give their assessment, then each person gets a chance to give their assessment, then we discuss it. Debate may be possible, but rest assured you are in a good faith zone, and you will get your chance to get your point across. The point of this space is for all of us to discuss the issues, what we think of it, and keep an open mind to what the other person has to say. But please remember to keep it within TOS. Now, without further ado, let's welcome our guest this evening, Fairy Queen. What's going on, Fairy Queen?
Hi, Alex. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here. I think tonight's going to be super fun. For those of you watching, okay, if you too would like to drink alongside both of us, okay, you should know that I am sporting this lovely Sprite Zero can, okay? It's delicious. It tastes like real Sprite. And best of all, it doesn't make you fat. In fact, I'm going to drink it and feel not guilty at all. Watch.
There you go.
I love Sprite.
Oh.
Yeah. Sprite's one of my favorite drinks. When I was a kid growing up, I always used to say, "Sprite, please," like the penguin, like in the commercial, like asking for Sprite. Yep. Sprite, please, just like that.
Absolutely. Is it kind of like also a tie-in like with your name, Fairy Queen, especially like Sprite, Fairy Queen kind of deal?
I didn't think about it, but what a lovely endorsement, okay? Yes, Fairy Queen, endorsed by Sprite, okay? Get it cold, fresh lime. I am the lemon to this lime taste, okay?
Absolutely. And tonight I'm actually going to be sober tonight because I had to take some naproxen earlier because I had like a strained muscle or whatever. So tonight I'm going to be drinking Sprecher Maple Root Beer. Big fan of this. I'm more of like the Henry Weinhardt's, but the reason I like this is because it's got cane sugar instead of like high fructose corn syrup or something like that. Cane sugar is delicious, especially with sodas. Big fan of this. This isn't bad. My favorite kind of root beer, though, is Henry Weinhardt's. It's really good, very smooth. It's not like, doesn't give you that bloated feeling at the end of it. But this one is quite delicious and only 266 calories, so holla. It's pretty awesome. So, but like I said, I mean, I always say it doesn't matter. Alcoholic, non-alcoholic, we're all just here to have a chill and really, really good time. That's all there is to it. So, anyway.
Absolutely.
So, before we get started, though, Fairy Queen, why don't you go ahead and just tell everybody where they can find you, what kind of content you do and stuff?
Hi, everybody. My name. I describe myself as a conservative liberal. It's what I call myself these days. So what that means is if you catch me on like a panel, you'll probably hear me giving like some conservative takes and some liberal takes. Ultimately, I usually vote blue. But generally speaking, I'm more of a conservative liberal as opposed to like some other more progressive liberals. I do consider myself to be a feminist, and so a lot of the content of the debates that I participate usually focus on women's issues. So if you would like to hear, I guess, a dino's perspective on feminism, please go ahead and join and check me out. Thank you, guys.
Phenomenal. Yeah. And the reason why I put down the term pragmatic progressive, people like, that's a made up term. I'm like, well, all terms are made up. I mean, like, they just kind of we'd all just appear nowhere. But like, it's just because, the one thing I do is like, I will be voting blue as well. But the thing is, like, if I think an issue is stupid, I shouldn't be afraid to say it's stupid, whether it's Democrat, Republican, or something like that. I try to be as pragmatic as possible. And I try to have like a position that is actually strong that I can actually defend, essentially. And because like some people are a bit like, if you don't agree with me on this, then you're obviously a horrible person. It's like, no, you're just going to alienate more people that way. It's okay. Like if you vote Democrat, but you say, you know what, that's an interesting point from people across the aisle. It's good to have those conversations, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen you a couple times in some of the panels on Wick's channel, actually. So that's where I first saw you, actually. So Wick has a lot of good panels.
Well, yeah, he has great panels. Can I ask, what panel did you see me on?
Jeez, I can't remember which one it was. I think it was a feminism
That's
one.
all good.
Yeah, there's quite a few. There's quite a few. I think one of them was like. I'm sorry, you caught me at a bad time.
No, No, don't worry about it. Yeah. No, but Wick is great.
Mhm.
Really, he's a great host and he's a great guy and he's a good friend.
Yeah,
I owe Wick quite a bit for helping me like throughout like this past year. He has been, and it's not even just like on stage, like when he's moderating, he always has really good questions. It's also like backstage as well. Like
sure.
he's incredibly kind, incredibly understanding. But yeah, which is why I go on his panels. It's why I started going on his panels over a year ago.
Sure.
It was because like I saw that from him. So yeah,
Absolutely.
but you probably saw me there. Yeah, I had a maid panel last week where I argued against the policy as it stands right now.
Hmm.
And then this past Tuesday, we had a conversation about the Title IX changes that recently like came into effect.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Because those were two big things that have happened recently. Like Canada has changed its policy like regarding MAID, and they've pushed it forwards to 2027 as opposed to it was supposed to go into effect this past March of 2024, but they changed it recently. And then of course there are the Title IX changes, which everyone is interested in and is all up in a tizzy about right now.
Certainly. Absolutely. So anyway, shall we go ahead and get into our current events?
Let's do it.
All right.
Let's
All right. So, all right. Topic number one. Okay. So a bill was brought by the Cookeville Republican down in Tennessee, Cookeville Republican Ryan Williams, that will permit teachers to carry concealed firearms on campuses for grades K through 12, as long as they meet certain requirements. Now, the Tennessee General Assembly earlier this week ruled in favor and gave the okay for this to take place. Now, the teachers who wish to carry conceal, however, need to meet the following requirements. A memorandum of understanding between local law enforcement, the school district, and whoever the principal is at that time. Once those requirements are met, they also have to meet the cert requirements, submit to a background check, pass a psychological evaluation. They have to have 40 hours of live firearms training, and they also submit their fingerprints. Now, the bill passed with 68 in favor, 28 against, and 2 was a non-vote. And it will head to the Governor Lee's desk to be signed off on. Now, Democrats and other people that were opposed to this bill were heard in the gallery screaming, "Blood on your hands." And the Tennessee GOP feels like this would be a great deterrent for would-be school shooters. Now, let's be honest. We've all seen so-called deterrents called school resource officers. And so far, they have not only proven to not be effective deterrents, but some experts even believe this emboldens shooters, actually. Now, we also what happened in Uvalde, who spent a great deal of money on their police force and bragged about how the response time is second to none and best in the state, only to be proven wrong when they failed to save the lives of many innocent victims, including children, in Uvalde, Texas. Now, ever since the Nashville shooting that occurred at the Covenant School, people have been wondering, how best can we protect our most vulnerable? And apparently this seems to be their answer. And we've seen different ways. Like, for example, they've built like doors that, or like little shelters that they can pull out that children can scamper off to. I think that's a terrible idea because that just keeps them in a more enclosed area. And I think that they keep on trying to find different reasons, saying, oh, it's a mental health issue. It's not the guns issue. It's just a mental health issue. We just need school cops. We need school resource officers. And now they're saying that we need to arm teachers. I mean, I don't know how you feel about this, but let's go ahead and get your thoughts on this one.
So I have a couple of thoughts about them. One of them is that I think that there are things that are not controversial that have nothing to do with like I think there's a way to make schools safer for everyone where things that you can do that I think would pass with bipartisan colors. So one thing that like is a simple, it's not an easy thing to do, but it is a simple thing that like we just had to do recently at the school where I work, which is we had to receive training on how to better identify students who might potentially become homicidal. So we received instruction and education on like what signs to look for, what like if a student says, screams like I'm going to kill you, or like has any signs of disturbing behavior, to pass it up the chain. Now, we had a conversation and I still feel iffy about this, which is don't you risk stigmatizing some students? Like there's a possibility, right, that like certain populations of students might be reported more than others, right? There are concerns that I have with that policy, like too, like that I don't think are ridiculous to be fearful of. But I think it's something that teachers need to know, right? And frankly, something that everyone needs to know, because that's going to probably reduce like the numbers of school shootings anyway. It's how do we identify like what a school shooting looks like before one actually happens. And in order to do that, we need to have like more training on like what to look for within our students, like and what students to be specifically looking out for. And that's something that You can have that conversation without even touching, like discussing about guns, right? You don't have to get like sucked into the whirlpool of that conversation in order to insist and implement that policy, like in multiple different schools, right? More training. I don't think, I can't, I don't know why anyone would be opposed to it, like on like a first, my knee jerk, like as just as a knee jerk suggestion. So that's the first thing. Another, this might be controversial to fire codes, but like this is another thing that I think all schools can do, which is more schools I think should probably invest in technology where teachers can bolt their doors safely without there being a possibility of like somebody coming with a gun and shooting the handle off and like opening the door. So there are barriers. So one barrier, for instance, it's a metal sheath so some doors in schools, they'll have like this sort of crooked arm. I don't know what it's called, but it's on the very top of a door in order to open it. There's a metal sheath where you can pick it up and you can slide it over that arm, like on the back end of the door, and it will completely bolt and lock the door. So like even if somebody does shoot the handle off and they try to like open the door that way, they can't because it's like bolted and sealed shut. There's another thing, it's a metal device where you can slip it underneath the door and you can lock in the handles, and it basically makes the door impenetrable. And there are many other examples of like pieces of technology that teachers have come up with that they've used. Like one example I saw was a huge giant whiteboard that was driven like from across, like it was sort of tucked away in the wall. But if you pulled it forward, it became its own wall, and you had a second safe room like within the class. I'm not explaining it very well, but essentially like by pulling out like this lever like on the wall, it created a second safe room where the students could go in, and the teacher could lock the door, and that door was bulletproof. So those are some things that I think that like everyone could do. I think those are simple things. They're not controversial things. They're not terribly political things. And so I think those are things that we could do to suggest on making schools safer. Now, as far as like the real question, which is, should teachers be armed? I don't know if teachers should be harmed, but as somebody who works in a school, I do think it's a good idea to have someone in the building who has access to a firearm. I think I don't think it should be everyone. I don't think that everyone is suited to do it, but I will tell you that like as a teacher who works like in a school building, it does make me feel less safe to know that like if somebody came in like with a gun and tried shooting up the school, that there is no one in the school with a firearm to counteract that. So I think that there should be policies. I think it should be regulated. I don't think it should be just anyone. I don't think it should be Miss Honey, the kindergarten teacher, right? Like with the pistol, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, it's going to depend, right? But in many schools, there are many schools that have that where there are people who are employed in the district who would be more than qualified, who do have experience with firearms. And I think that if you can find somebody like that to be the person responsible for managing the firearm in question, I don't think that's a bad thing. So that would be my response to the first topic. What are your thoughts?
Well, so here's the thing that I found most interesting, right, is the fact that they're talking about Army teachers. Okay, I've never been a school teacher, but I have been an instructor while I was active duty, right? And I can tell you, it's hard enough as is trying to keep the attention span of like students, right? Especially like younger people. Let alone the fact that that's just one more thing that you have to worry about, because we've seen an increase of like students attacking their teachers. What if this student is violent? Now, I'm not saying all students are violent. I'm saying, what if a teacher gets one student that is violent and then takes the gun away? That's just created a whole different scenario. I feel like there's more problems that this can actually create, because, you know, I've seen some English teachers, they're like 5'2", dainty little teachers, something like that, you know, male or female. They can't take on like a growing, athlete or something like that, because it really complicates things. And some children aren't made to react to things like that. And some of them would be like so horrified to see what's going on. They don't know how they would react. To see like one of your own fellow students actually go up and disarm your teacher and then use it on the teacher. Next thing you know, they start taking, like, that would probably scare more children. They would probably be, it was like the freeze or flee bit. Some of them may not react. Now, I'm not saying all students react to this, but this is just what I'm thinking, because, children are not conditioned to go through these things. They're not conditioned, even though this is like seemed to be the norm. But I feel like there definitely needs to be something to be done about this to protect, students, kids. They're the way of our future, essentially. But I feel like we are doing a very, very poor job. Like, in our country alone, we have mass shootings all the time. And
Yeah.
I'm a gun owner too. I own firearms, but I believe in first firm responsibility. But like when I look at this legislation, here's the thing that I'm wondering about Tennessee: is this really on the top of the priority list? Because I actually looked it up, and I forgot to cover this at first, but I can cover it now.
Hmm.
This is where Tennessee ranks as far as like other categories. They rank 41st in crime and corrections, 46th in public safety, 12th in the economy, 33rd in education, 5th in physical stability, 34th in healthcare, 16th in infrastructure, 31st in natural environment, and 26th in opportunity. It sounds like there's a lot of issues that they could actually, like the whole crime and corrections, that sounds like that's a bigger issue that they probably need to rectify. Let alone the fact that they've got their 34th in healthcare and like in education 33rd. I wonder what is it that they're primarily focused on. I mean, their K through 12 has like the graduation rate, I guess, is good, but like it's just the quality of the education is that the issue is. So I sometimes wonder, is this the top of their priority list essentially? Shouldn't they be concerned about other things maybe? I don't know. That's just my point of view about it.
Probably pragmatically they should be, but remember, like, what is it? Is next year like the election is like strolling right up to us,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, I mean, like, this is the reason like why we're probably going to see a lot of legislation that's being pushed forward that's similar to this, right?
Certainly.
Legislation that is designed to catch the eye of the public, that's designed to stir up controversy, that's designed to stir up trouble, and designed, frankly, to get people to vote for Biden or for Trump, right? So like if Tennessee is passing this type of legislation, I'm assuming like this is a conservative. I'm assuming the House Republicans of Tennessee passed this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're passing this to try to get people, I would assume, to vote for Trump, like come like fall of 2024, because like come fall of 2024, right, the Republicans will want to be able to say we were able to like pass this piece of legislation for Tennessee, and
Sure.
the our friends across the aisle were not, right? It's the
So,
same reason, like it's the same political reason as like why like what is it? What's his face? The governor of Florida recently like passed
Ron
like the
DeSantis.
bill regarding like the death penalty and the
Mm-hmm.
for child molesters like who had molested somebody under the age of 12, and it was the I think a repeated offense. I like it's the same reason, right?
Yeah.
Like they're like Republicans across the country are like passing pieces of legislation like these, I think, for because in order to appeal to the base,
Oh,
would be
certainly.
my guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
certainly. I do think that I understand it. Like they're trying to make it seem like they're out there protecting children, but the thing is, um, a lot of these Republicans, however, I have found that a lot of these are like knee jerk reaction decisions. And don't get me wrong, Democrats sometimes do the same thing. But like when you think about the long term legislation, Democrats have passed better legislation, like in 2021, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. That infrastructure is one of my top topics right there. I love talking about infrastructure because I deal with it all the time and I
Mhm.
encounter it all the time. And if you don't have good infrastructure, you're going to have poor economic opportunity for everybody. Essentially, it's all kind of tied together. But a
Mhm.
couple weeks ago, when I had Peanut on, we talked about how the House Oversight Committee was focusing on dishwashers, laundry machines, and things like that. It's like this is not important, but they're trying to make it seem like the Democrats are coming for these items essentially. But kind of
Mhm.
going back into this topic, I just kind of worry about like if this is really going to make people safer because I remember John Stewart made a very interesting point. In a country that has more guns than people, and if you say more guns make us safer, when does that happen? We have more guns than we have citizens. And we're supposed to say, oh, well, if we had more guns here, we would be able to protect more people. I'm like, when does that happen? I mean, you had
Mhm.
cops, 400 cops in Uvalde that stopped. It took a person that didn't even work there with a shotgun to go take down the shooter, essentially. And this person wasn't
Mhm.
even, that's not even their forte. I think the person worked Border Patrol for crying out loud. Then you got people saying, well, let's just hire veterans. Okay, not all veterans are going to be qualified because, like, I still think in order for you to become a security guard or something like that, you still have to be able to do the same thing, the background checks. Now, the legislation, I'm surprised that they are so good about, background checks, psychological evaluation, 40 hours of live firearms training, submitting your fingerprints when that's not even the requirements to own a firearm in the first place. I just find
Mhm.
that very curious as to why that might be. It's like some of these don't even require that much. I mean, a background check and that's it. No psychological evaluation, no live firearms training, or fingerprints essentially to put in there. You can just go ahead and buy a gun in some places. I mean, I found that very curious though. What do you think?
I'm not sure what the process is to purchasing a firearm. I am not a firearm owner. So
Mhm.
I've shot guns a couple of times, like one time last year and one time in my uncle's backyard with his shotgun, like we were shooting tin cans, like as some Canadian geese were floating off into the wilderness.
Mhm.
But that's like those are the only two times. So I'm unsure as to like whether or not like you would need to have a fingerprint, like, or whether or not if that's true in like the other states. I know it's not true in South Carolina, I don't think.
Mhm.
But as far as like this being a requirement, I think it's a good requirement for the school to have this for people, like to be required to have this. And I don't think that more guns makes you more safe. I don't think that's necessarily true. But I do think, and I don't think again that it should be just anyone that has access to this firearm, right? I don't think it should be the kindergarten teacher. I don't think it should be someone like me, right? The English teacher, right? Who
Mhm.
is, 5 foot something inches, right?
Yeah.
And little experience with it, right? Like I should not be the person in charge of like this firearm, right? And probably it honestly shouldn't even be in a classroom. It shouldn't be like person is qualified. It should probably be located in the office in with administration in a safe. That's probably where it should be. And it would make sense because if we have somebody who's going to get into the school building, the first people who will probably realize that they're there will be administration because that's where the cameras are, right? That's where they'll be able to see them like coming up, like with, especially like if the person is coming in, because this happened, like when was it? Sandy Hook. This is where
Mhm.
this happened. Somebody cracked a door open, right, off to the side of the building, and
Mhm.
then snuck into the building like through the cracked door.
Mhm.
The first person that's going to be able to catch that really and to notice that something was off is going to be the receptionist in the office, right?
Mhm.
So whoever it is that has access to the firearm in order to handle it should probably be somebody that's there, right? So I would agree with you that having like a firearm just in the classroom, right? Especially like when altercations come up, especially like when you have somebody who is frankly like behaving like in a bad way towards you and you're worried that something bad is about to happen, you do not want a firearm in the room, right? You don't want to accidentally be tempted. You don't want a teacher to be like tempted to pick it up and to use it to like threaten to tell their student to back away from the desk, right?
Yeah.
Like obviously, right? But that doesn't mean though that like there couldn't be somebody in the building, right, who has access to it. It's just that it probably shouldn't be Miss Honey in English period in creative writing in second period. It should be Mr. Herbert in the office, right behind the safe, like in like the receptionist's desk. Like that's who should have access to it, right?
Absolutely.
So that's I guess like what I would say to that.
Mhm.
As far as like resource officers, I know you mentioned that earlier at the very beginning, like whether or not like and there is something to that, right? The idea that more security in schools does not necessarily mean that the school is safer. In fact, like the more things that you have in the school that make it feel like a prison, like it's called like what is it called? It's called the school to prison pipeline, right?
Mhm.
It's the
Yeah.
idea like the more things that you have like in the school, like that like requiring a student to have a clear plastic backpack, requiring them to put their backpack through a metal detector, requiring there being a metal detector the minute they walk into the school, right? At our school, we require all of our students to wear their badges on at all times so that if somebody is on campus who is not supposed to be there, they're easily like visually identifiable, right? So that
Mhm.
like we can this person doesn't have an ID. Where's your badge? Oh, you don't have your badge. So who's your mom? Oh, she's 83 years old and she's in
Mhm.
the nursing home. I think we need you to leave campus, bud. Right? Like
Yeah.
this, it's that sort of thing, right?
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
it seems like there is a an issue of like where people are like, my goodness, when I went to school, I didn't have these problems. Well, yeah, obviously, the whole school shooter thing wasn't really much of a thing except when I was growing up because I think I was a sophomore in I was a freshman when Thurston High School in Oregon took place. I was a sophomore when Columbine happened. And that's
Mm.
where everything kind of like escalated. And I think I really appreciate the fact that they actually teach you all how to look for the signs because that's the most important thing is like it's good to be proactive instead of reactive. And I understand that you don't want to seem like you're alienating the student, but it's better to be safe than sorry kind of deal. Because, like I said, being a teacher or instructor is hard. It's really, really hard.
Yeah.
Especially like when you've got like somebody that like confides in you is like, hey, listen, I saw this, I need your help, but I don't want to seem like a snitch kind of deal.
Yeah.
But we have to take these situations seriously because I feel like there are times like where teachers they might have said something, but they didn't feel like I don't want to seem like I'm getting in their business. What if I piss off their parents? Like then they're gonna get on my case by, well, this is none of your business. This is none of your concern. I mean, these are all things that I'm sure teachers. I mean, I'm not a school teacher, but it's hard enough as is, and just like adding a gun to the situation, just I think it complicates things. Honestly, just it's one more thing they have to worry about. Essentially, I mean, I know like in a situation where like in the school shooting happens, like, oh my god, now I wish I had a gun, but by then it's too late. It's just I think it's on a case by case basis. Honestly, that's just me.
It depends. Like when it comes to identifying who the student, so there are a couple things. One of them is Columbine. There's so much that people said about Columbine that like was exaggerated in a really gross and weird way. Like one of them was like I remember like when I was school, there was a book that was written about Columbine that was about one of the girls who died in Columbine.
Mm-hmm.
But the story was meant to be a spiritual religious story because the story was that like the story that was proposed like within like it was based off of this girl's diary. And I went to a Catholic school. That's why I know about this book, right? And the book basically claimed that I'm not sure if it was Klebold or if it was the other one. So one of them approached her and asked her if she believed in God, and then she said yes, and then she was shot in like the hallways of the school.
Yeah.
And this after the fact, what happened in Columbine and what happened to her specifically, it was framed as a kind of she was framed as like a religious martyr. She was framed as a woman who died for her beliefs, which would have been fine. But some of the stuff I think they said about her was exaggerated. Like they exaggerated her religiosity. It's sort of weird to put it this way, but by lionizing what happened, it sort of objectified what happened in a way. And it turned, this girl, who was really brutally shot and murdered by these two horrible people.
Mm-hmm.
And it sort of turned it into this sort of gaudy, well, now we're going to watch this and now I have some sort of catharsis, spiritual catharsis from it. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but like I've always felt like a little grossed out by that. Like when people do that to like examples of natural disasters where you'll watch like a real account of a natural disaster. And it's not even sometimes a natural disaster. Sometimes it's a soldier that's gone off to war, like John McCain, for instance. Like imagine, for instance, there was a documentary, it was a biopic, and it was about John McCain, like when he was sent to Vietnam at the POW camp, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the point of the film, it was to convince you to convert to, and I don't even know if he was terribly religious, but let's say Christianity. I'm going to make a bet that that's probably like what faith he practiced, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it sort of framed the whole, everything that happened to him, like in that camp, right? As, spiritual rejuvenation, right? As truly believing in Christ, as truly believing in God, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why John McCain was able to escape and able to live, right? And that's sort of like how the way it was framed, right? Well, first of all, John McCain didn't say that as far as I know, right?
Mm-hmm.
John McCain, like never after the fact wrote anything that seemed to indicate that. There is no actual, like I'm sure like he's maybe like referenced like his faith before, but I don't think he ever actually wrote something that said that like, that dedicated or sort of attributed what happened to him to that, right? So the consequence is that when you frame it, a person who is not John McCain frames it that way to me, it feels manipulative, right? It feels manipulative. It feels like you're using this person's, it also feels like stolen valor in a way, like you're taking like somebody else's like pain and suffering and you're sort of, I don't even know, like sort of twisting it into this other thing to make it prove this like other belief that you have instead of just looking objectively at the horrific thing that happening. And then just, I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that happens a lot, right? Like where you'll take like something terrible that happens to somebody else, right? And then speak for that other person about like what that experience means, right?
Sure.
And I've never appreciated that.
Yeah.
I'm sort of rambling. I'm sorry,
it's
Alex.
Okay. No.
Yeah.
That's I like getting people's points of view on these things. I think the thing that offends me more than anything else, though, is I see a T-shirt or a social media post, and it says, "God, why did you allow this to happen in this school? Because you took me out of your schools. That's why." I hate that. I find that completely offensive because, like, that just makes it seem like, well, because you don't believe in me anymore, you obviously deserved it. I find that repugnant completely. I mean, just, I think it's important for us to recognize and see the signs as early as possible, but it's just people try to twist this and make this a political thing. They try to make it in. Of course, I'm guilty of this too, but I just try to find out what is the root cause. What is it that led to this point? That's the thing that we have to focus on first. But it's just, again, and I think you hit the nail on the head earlier. It's just because they're making these decisions now to make it seem like, hey, listen, we're doing this for your own best interests. So this is why you should vote for us. Because the other side, they don't really give a shit about you. So they're just going to they're just going to be partisan hacks about this. They're just coming to take your guns away. They have no way of actually protecting you, essentially. So
yeah,
I don't know. That's my point of view, essentially.
Yeah. It's something else too, right? Like there's this thing that we do. It's not just like school shootings though. Like it's other natural disasters. 9/11 is an example of this. Fascism is an example of this, right? Like there are so many people, like you'll sit down and you'll have a conversation about World War II, the Holocaust. Like those are the favorite examples, right? Yep. Well, there's and you see, this is why my special theory about the world was proven to be right because of X, right? Who knows what X is? X is always like some big horrible disaster that happened in history, right? And it's usually something that's highly controversial, usually something that like will immediately get people upset, right? So school shootings are an example of that. The Holocaust is an example. I guess what's happening like in Gaza right now between Israel and Palestine, like it is an example. So I've noticed that happens quite a bit. As far as like this particular example, like regarding like school shootings in schools, it's curious like to ask the question like why it happens, like what's the reason behind like why school shootings. Like an example could be like just having more access to guns, like I think, and certainly greater access. But is that true really? Like do we have why do you think that is, Alex? Why are school shootings more prevalent now? Like how did they come to be?
I think it's because they're easier targets usually, and they're the one. Sometimes I think it's because I think the reason why they're happening more often is because we haven't really done enough legislation. So obviously, this is a target that's easy to get. It's going to capture the most attention. Some of them are doing this because and I'm not even going to say it's mental disorder. I think it's just because some people just don't give a shit anymore. They've just reached their breaking point, and it's time to go out, and this is how I'm going to do it, essentially. And people can make the argument, oh, well, that obviously makes somebody crazy. It's like, well, guess what? That means that every suicide bomber is crazy. That means everybody that kills thousands of people in the battlefield is crazy. It's not. It's just, it depends on the individual. Obviously, if a person puts out like a manifesto of some sort and says, I'm doing this for this reason, there's obviously an agenda behind it. But if a person says, well, I see purple flying monsters at this school, then yeah, you could probably weigh into the fact that this person's probably crazy. But, in some situations, it seems like this is never like a spur of the moment kind of thing. This is something that builds up over time, I think. You had that one incel years ago. He said he never had a girlfriend. One girl broke his heart, so he decided to take it out on other young women. I wouldn't say he was mentally ill. I'd say he just was a guy that just didn't care anymore. He just said, I know what I'm doing. I know these are the consequences, and I'm just going to do this anyway because my heart's been broken many times. And I'm not saying that what he did was right, not by a long shot. That's never the answer, essentially. With some of these school shooters, we never actually understood the manifesto of the person that shot the Covenant School, but that's also because the families have asked, do not release this manifesto, please. Out of respect for my children, do not release this manifesto. And I respect that. Yeah. Because I don't want any more people finding another reason to say, I relate to that person, so this is what I'm going to do next. That's what I think this usually is. And once again, I just think it comes down to, well, they haven't done anything in this state, so I'm just going to do it myself, but I'm going to do it this way. I mean, that's just my speculation. I have no proof to back this up with. So.
Yeah. I think all of that's true. But then the question becomes like, well, where was Elliot Rodgers in 1940, right? And you probably would say, well, he was off on the beaches of Normandy, getting his head blown off right in front of, like what is it called? Like a hedgehog, like in the beach, right? Like that's probably like what that's, but then you could still ask the question like a ton of different ways, right? Where was Elliot Rodger in 1920? Where was Elliot Rodger in 1900? Where was Elliot Rodger? Like people had access, liberal, and I don't mean like politically, but they had easy access to guns, right? Prior to like I just use it this way, but the popularity of like school shootings, right? Prior to this becoming more of, right? Of she knew a friend in high school, right? And he was standing in the parking lot with the high school principal. They're both comparing shotguns, out of his car, right? In the high school parking lot. That could never happen today, right? That would never happen. If that happened, not only would that student be expelled, right, from campus, the principal would almost certainly be fired, right? And it would have made like it would have been a news story like the following day, right? Like somebody would have talked about it. People would have taken pictures of it, right? But that's not true. So it's not true today, but it used to be true, right? It used to be true not that long ago, like where this used to be an accepted thing. So why is it just that we're becoming more mentally ill? I think there's some data to show that, actually. There's some data that shows that, like, across the board, not just liberal women, for those of you who are cackling in the background, but it's true for everyone. Liberal women, conservative men, and liberal men. It's all across the board. Steadily speaking, like, rates of mental health, like, they are plummeting across the board for everyone. Everyone seems to be experiencing worse mental health outcomes. Is there maybe something to the idea that worsening mental health might be the reason behind like why we are seeing an increased rate of like school shootings, given the fact that like uniquely we're having worse mental health outcomes today as opposed to like in the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s?
Certainly. One thing that could also play into it, because one thing that can like you asked like where was Ellie Rogers in the 1940s and 1950s and stuff like that, right? There's one thing that we all know that they didn't have: social media. Sometimes social media can really play into that. Now, I'm not saying it's the root cause, but I feel like sometimes that's what captures everybody's attention is social media. What's the buzz? What's going to get people's attention, essentially? And I feel like that partially plays into it as well. Now, and again, the only reason I say mental health is because that seems to be the general excuse that people just run to. And they say, well, we need to focus on mental health. Well, every bit of legislation that has tried to come forth, people say, nope, we're not going to vote for it because that's just government intervention. It's like, okay, so you say you want to focus on mental health, but why do you vote against it then? I mean, you identify the problem. Like it's like they say, the first step in identifying a problem or like in fixing a problem is identifying that there is one. And the question is, what is the main problem? And I just feel like in this country, we just don't have a general consensus upon it. We are always making excuses for what it's video games, it's movies, it's TV, it's stuff that we see on, it's the kids getting bullied, it's mental health. Everybody has all these different excuses, but we just don't seem to, I just don't think we have it pegged yet because, everybody wants to point fingers, it seems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't know enough about being a firearm owner or purchasing a gun really to comment on whether or not the restrictions are too strict or whether or not they are too liberal. But my assumption would be that asking for a background check and asking for a student, especially if it's a student, to pass a psychological background check, that should be a no-brainer. That should be a nothing before especially if the person is a minor and I don't think that there shouldn't. I don't know what the issue would be with that. So I personally don't have any problems with that. But I mean, if there is a reason, I'd be curious to hear people give one on why that would be a problem. I don't know why that would be a problem.
Certainly.
Yeah. Well, I actually, I'm trying to think. I guess it's probably rooted in the idea that it's a constitutional right, correct? So it's your Second Amendment. It's the Second Amendment, right? So and the question is it's such a dangerous thing for you to have that for you to have possession of this, right? Because you didn't pass the required background check. That means that you're dangerous. It means you could hurt somebody with this, and that's why we're not going to let you have it. So just to root this another way, freedom of speech, right? So if we have somebody so suppose you have an adult and the adult wants to become, I don't know, what's a type of speech that's really harmful to society? They want to become a comedian, let's say, or maybe they don't want to become a stand-up comedian. They want to become a journalist. Okay. They want to become a journalist. Okay. Now, just like with the Second Amendment, there are laws, right, around how you can exercise this amendment right? You can't lie about somebody's reputation. You can't blackmail someone. You can't write a true threat and actually accuse and actually say I'm going to kill someone, right? There's some brackets around what you're just there's some brackets around you can't go use your shotgun. You can't go shoot somebody in the mall, right? You can't, you can't threaten McDonald's, and demand your burger. Otherwise, except there are all these things you can't do, right?
Sure.
But we don't require you, right, to sit down and to pass a background check, to put in a fingerprint, or to pass any kind of assessments in order for you to have like full access and rights to your freedom of speech, right? Even though we recognize that words can be harmful and they can even kill people, right? It's even possible to potentially kill someone, right?
Sure.
So, like, would you feel comfortable with there being these types of restrictions around voting, for instance, or around freedom of speech, or around like any other? I'm just trying to think of like first amendment rights, because that's, I think, probably what the argument would be rooted in, right? It's
Sure.
that this is an amendment right. So should an able-bodied adult have to pass all of these qualifiers for them to have access to this right?
Well, in order to vote, you have to register to vote. So that's the first thing. You have to have like, an address. You have to have like proper signatures and whatnot. You have to show residency that you're a U.S. citizen in order to vote. When it comes down to speech, like I look at rights come with responsibility as well, because, and you hit the nail on the head. Like, here's a great example. Alex Jones, we all know, is a very controversial figure. And he was saying things like, well, Sandy Hook was a false flag operation. He was like going around saying that these children didn't actually die. His audience like actually drove by these parents' house and harassed them, saying, hey, your children actually aren't dead. Bill O'Reilly was talking about how they're butchering children, babies inside of abortion clinics. An abortion doctor was killed because of that. You have to be responsible for what you say, because what you can say can actually have negative repercussions. Now, should there be like background checks or something like this? No. However, when it comes down to like, there are some limitations. For example, if you want to host an actual rally or a protest, sometimes you actually have to register to do that protest or parade in certain places. So those are some things to consideration. But I was looking like this though. When it comes to freedom of speech, just because you can say it doesn't mean you always should, because somebody might take exception. Like, here's a good example before we move on to the next topic though. Just because you have the right to burn an American flag, I support your decision to do it. However, you might run into a guy that might take exception to that, and he might knock your block off, essentially. Now, I'm not condoning that, but somebody might take exception to that. And some people just feel very strongly about speech. Some actions might affect people a certain way and might drive them to do something. And again, I don't like it when somebody burns an American flag, but it is protected speech. And that's just kind of the way I look at it. What are your thoughts on that before we move on?
On protected speech? No, I absolutely agree. I think that like, well, actually, I don't know about the responsibility part. I feel like that's an argument like we need to have later, because I'm not sure. We actually had me on the Reverie, like me and some of the other people like actually discussed this at great length, like whether or not you should be held responsible. Like, are you responsible for somebody else like picking up a gun and shooting someone else because you wrote a book? Or because like you said something on live television, or because you said something on the radio. Like, I think that would be really interesting to hash out sometime, but that's for later.
Sure.
Yeah. But that's all she wrote for this topic, Alex.
Yep.
I'm ready for the next one.
Yep. Hit me. What's your first topic?
Okay. So my first topic that I would like to talk to you about would be Harvey Weinstein's New York conviction, which was just recently overturned. So for those of you who don't know, this literally just happened. It was published like just 2 days ago on April 25th, 2024. The state's top court ruled that Mr. Weinstein, the disgraced Hollywood producer whose sexual abuse case incited the Me Too movement, did not receive a fair trial. A separate 16-year sentence in California was not affected. So in a 4-3 decision on Thursday, New York's highest court overturned Harvey Weinstein's 2020 conviction on felony sex crime charges. A reversal that horrified and dismayed many of the women whose decision to speak out against Mr. Weinstein, a prominent Hollywood producer, accelerated the #MeToo movement. A New York Court of Appeals agreed with Mr. Weinstein's defense team that the trial judge who presided over the sex crimes case in Manhattan, Justice James Burke, made a critical error when he let prosecutors call as witnesses several women who testified that Mr. Weinstein had assaulted them, even though none of those allegations led to charges. The women became known as the Molyneux witnesses, a term which refers to trial witnesses who are allowed to testify about criminal acts that the defendant has not been charged with committing. In writing for the majority, Judge Jenny Rivera said permitting such testimony in Mr. Weinstein's case has served to wrongly diminish the defendant's character before the jury. So its decision, in its decision, the court came to the conclusion that prosecutors had done just that, and along with Justice Burke, had violated a central tenet of criminal trials. Defendants should be judged only on the charges against them. So that's what has recently happened. My interpretation is basically the same interpretation that the other dissenting judges, like in that New York Court of Appeals, had, which is that this is terrible news. This is terrible news for women. This is a part of a growing trend, according to their decision, according from their perspective, that a number of cases like this, where they'll get the guy, they'll have him convicted, they'll have him go to court, and then the conviction will be reversed on a technicality because paperwork wasn't submitted, because the prosecution was overly zealous, like when they presented their case. And in this case, the prosecution absolutely fumbled the bag by bringing and trying to poison the well of the jury with all of this other information about Harvey Weinstein, instead of just specifically focusing on the exact crime that they showed up to court to discuss. And because of that, that's the reason, like, that's the basis upon which why this was conviction was overturned. It's really concerning. A similar thing happened with Bill Cosby just a few years ago, which is yep, exactly the immediate connection that I made. And again, this is sort of showing the holes in the Me Too movement. It's showing how the Me Too movement, it seems to me, there seems to be a backlash to the Me Too movement. This decision, I don't know if it would be fair to say that this decision is a part of the backlash, because this is in court. This isn't a part of the cultural aesthete that we're having around sexual assault and Me Too, but it adds to the pile, right? And it definitely makes the world a much scarier place. If you're trying to be come forward about someone having assaulted you in the past, because now the culture at the time of Me Too was, if you come forward and you talk about it, you will be believed. Hashtag Me Too, right? It's that I had that happen to me too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, now the culture is, well, sure, you could come forward and talk, but do you have enough evidence? Do you have enough? Can you prove what happened to you? Are you sure you have enough witnesses to prove that? There are a lot more questions right now. And now, in the aftermath of Me Too, because there are some events that fumbled the bag of Me Too, it's now going to become more difficult, I think, for women to come forward and to talk about their experiences because of the hump and trial that has recently happened with Me Too. It's now going to become a detriment. It's going to be harder, going forward, for another movement like Me Too to pick up speed, I think. And I have a very doomer opinion on these next few years. I don't think that they're going to be very good for women. A lot of decisions that have been made recently I find to be pretty frightening. So I'll leave it there. What are your thoughts, Alex?
So I find it so interesting because I've listened and read a lot of stories about Harvey Weinstein, about how much of a creep he was. One of the very, very first people that actually called him out was actually Seth MacFarlane, because his co-star that was in the movie Ted, that played the girlfriend of Ted, she talked about how when she was younger, Harvey Weinstein came onto her, made her very, very uncomfortable. And when she told him that in confidence, and when he was hosting the Oscars that year, when he read off all the women that were nominated for Best Actress, he says, "Congratulations, young ladies, you no longer have to find Harvey Weinstein attractive," basically. And everybody thought it was ha funny, but no, he was actually dead serious though. And he was one of the very first people to actually call him out. The thing I find most interesting is, and shameful at the same time, is the fact that, how is it something this big and you guys fumble the ball? Because these women already they basically suffered enough at his grasp. They already suffered, and then they had to go relive that trauma, essentially. And this is what happens. You guys fucked it up this badly. I mean, the Bill Cosby situation, same exact thing. I just wonder how it is that, you remember the Michigan State University gymnastics team, Larry Nassar?
Yep.
That was an open and shut case. They had all the evidence down packed. They had him nailed to the wall, and he obviously killed himself in prison, essentially. Now, how is it that they were able to get it right, but all these lawyers, all these attorneys, all these judges, for a really big case, managed to fumble two very, very important cases? And like you said, the Me Too movement faced a lot of backlash, because then people are saying, making a mockery, believe all women, believe all women, believe all women. And now, like, the people that say, I was afraid to come forward because I would not be believed, this is only going to just strengthen the case for those that are the naysayers saying, well, I think you're just making this up. People are going after E. Jean Carroll, saying that she lied about what happened with her and Donald Trump, even though a jury found that he did sexually assault her. Then you got people that are making a mockery of that as well. You've got Roseanne Barr saying, well, Joe Biden did this to me out here. She did that, and making a mockery of that case out of E. Jean Carroll. This only adds to that. And we can, like, you and I can both agree, this more than likely did happen with these women, because they came forward, even though they were terrified to come forward. But because of this technicality, they're going to wonder, am I ever going to get justice? They're going to see future victims, essentially. If they get sexually assaulted or raped by a high-profile person, would they be one to come forward? I saw what happened with Bill Cosby. I saw what happened with Harvey Weinstein. What if he gets out again and he comes after me again? Like, these are realities that a lot of people do not have to face, do not have to worry about. Me, I usually don't have to worry about these things whatsoever. Women, however, do, and people think, oh, you're just being a simp. No, it's a reality I don't have to face. Women do, actually. And I remember I had a conversation a few weeks ago, and my guest, actually, she said there was like an experiment that they did where guys were asked, what would you do if women were gone for 24 hours a day? What would you do? It was like, oh, I'd leave the toilet seat up, I would drink milk from the carton, all these other things. And when women were asked this, what would you do if men were gone for 24 hours a day? She says, I would actually go on a walk by myself at nighttime. I would go on a jog. Like, the differences are, vast. It's incredible, but at the same time, it's very, very tragic. So I know I keep rambling. My apologies. So
No, not at all. It's one thing that I wonder, specifically with politics and with Hollywood, is if the fact that it is the realm of politics and this is Hollywood, if that makes it, like, I don't know, more difficult to win these cases. Like, I think that might be part of what it is too, because it's not even just a matter of money, although that is, let's face it, playing a huge factor, like with Bill Cosby and with Harvey Weinstein. It's also has to do with the theatrics of it as well, right? That's something you get, like, from a Hollywood case or from a politics case that you wouldn't necessarily get from, even if it's the Olympics, like even like from the Larry Nassar case, right? Larry Nassar, like, as gross and disgusting as that case was, and as high profile as the case was because it was the Olympics, right? Larry Nassar is not Harvey Weinstein. He's not Bill Cosby. He's not Bill Clinton, right? He's not Donald Trump, right? He's not the guy on the stage, right? Whose face people have learned to love and to laugh with and to laugh at, right? That's not who Larry Nassar is. Larry Nassar is the creepy guy, right? The creepy doctor who sexually assaulted and molested tons of gymnasts, right? But he's out of the way and we can't see him, and therefore it's easier for the public probably to accept and to paint Larry Nassar as a monster, as opposed to these other people, right? Like Donald Trump, like Bill Clinton, like Bill Cosby, like Harvey. Maybe not Harvey Weinstein as much, but especially the last three people. These three people, like, they're charming, they're funny. Some of them used to be handsome, right? At one point they were, right? They were likable guys. They were likable men, right? They were men that were well loved throughout the country. Bill Cosby was known as not just as the doctor, right? He wasn't just known as the host of that that television show. He was known as America's dad. He was known as, like, the guy with the Jell-O cups, with the pudding cups. He was known as the guy who was promoting, education in schools. He actually went to a school because he was concerned about, like, the quality of education. He had, like, I think he has a doctorate degree in education. Like, I think he has a PhD in education. Like, these are people who were well beloved and well liked and enjoyed by the public. And so it makes pinning those guys a lot more difficult than someone like a Larry Nassar, right? It's a lot more difficult to throw America's dad in the closet as opposed to creepy doctor and God knows where he's from, right? Like, it's a lot easier to do that, right?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I've actually been to LA, and when people say, like, that's a place where dreams come through, no, it's a place where dreams go to die, because it is so hard. Like, I feel like at times people have to sell a part of their soul in order to hit it big. Now, that's not always the case, but that just seems to be the case. And, like, this is like not a new thing either. Like even Shirley Temple, when she was like 5 or 6 years old, she was subjected to stuff like this. Like she shared a story about like how like a producer or a director pulled her into the room and then he pulled his pants down and exposed himself to her, and she laughed because she didn't know what was going on, and he got pissed, and he took it out on her mom basically, and basically said she's never going to work in Hollywood again, basically.
Oh wow.
And stuff like this happen. I mean, this has been like an ongoing thing. Judy Garland, she wasn't necessarily, I don't know if she was actually sexually assaulted, but on the set of The Wizard of Oz, to get her into a serious role, the director came up and slapped the fuck out of her to get her into character. I mean, this is not a new thing. This is not a new phenomenon. This is why, like, yeah, I like movies. I do like Hollywood stuff. But I think it's a really disastrous culture. And it's just because, like, you've got these people in higher level positions. They will promise you the moon and back, but you got to do something for me first. The quid pro quo is, it's much larger in size, basically. And politics is no different. I'm not going to pretend like it isn't. There are people out there that are just as creepy as anybody else. It's just like, you know, I think sometimes people are very selective on who it is, though. Like people are like, oh, I obviously don't believe that person. They're just trying to create like a havoc or something like that. I mean, I go by this, right? I think every story needs to be taken seriously until it's proven that otherwise, kind of deal. Like I think all situations need to be taken seriously. Now, I'm not saying that there just be a court of public opinion saying this person's automatically guilty because A, B, and C. There have been too many people out there that I've seen that were accused of a crime they never committed. They went to prison for crimes they never committed. And then once the person like, okay, I made it all up, you know, that degrades it even further. And these people just lost a few years of their life and they didn't get any real justice. That's why it's important for these trials. That's why we have the justice system. It's to basically show the burden of proof and to prosecute those that are guilty and, you know, to acquit those that are innocent. That's how it's supposed to be. But, you know, the fact that they overturned this over technicality, it's like the criminal justice system has failed these women once again. That's all we really can look at it as.
It's really sad. There's something also too, again, like back to the theatrics, like of these cases. Like, did you see? Actually, you probably saw the. I watched the O.J. Simpson biopic on Netflix. It was the one that was like produced. It was produced by. It was the same person that directed American Horror Story. I think it was Ryan Murphy. Like he created like and I knew of O.J. Simpson, but I didn't know about O.J. Simpson. Like I hadn't really looked too deeply into the case. And then I sat down and I watched the biopic, like from like beginning to end. And one thing I did not realize before watching the show was just how theatrical that entire trial actually was. It was extremely theatrical. There was him putting the gloves on in the middle of like the courtroom. There was him saying, if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit, right? There was the horrible guy, the police officer who said the N-word 8,000 times. Yep, which was then played on recording for the jury to hear. Like there was just, and then there's the fact that he was a celebrity. There are tons of cameras outside of like the court as they leave and as they enter. Like there's so much about it that was just so theatrical. And the same was true for the Johnny Depp trial. I'm almost certain that the same was true, more than likely, for Bill Cosby, and it was probably true for Harvey Weinstein, right? And it's not just because you're trying to keep the jury entertained so that they will like you, so that they will vote for your case. I don't think it's just because of that. I think it is because these are high profile people who are on the stand. I think that is adding a level of theatricality to it that like makes it more likely that those people like get away with it. I think like that's part of like what's going on, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, speaking of like that O.J. Simpson case and such, I remember Chris Rock did stand up after that case was over with, and he says people think that O.J. Simpson got off because, you know, of his skin color. No, it's because of fame, essentially. It's like, I'll tell you like this: if Jerry Seinfeld was on trial for murder and he had an all Muslim jury, I can guarantee Jerry Seinfeld would be a free man. It's just like I thought that was hilarious because like I think fame probably had a lot to do with it. I don't know if Mark Furman, like how much he really swayed it, essentially, but I don't know. Theatrics is a really big thing because that's what's going to get the news the most. I mean, that captures. I feel like the media is very sensationalist and lazy because instead of focusing on serious issues, I remember at one point in 2008, I think it was, the main story for about a month was the death of Anna Nicole Smith. What? This is our main concern? There's other things going on right now in the year of 2008, but yet, we're focusing on Anna Nicole Smith. For an entire month, we focused on the drug addiction of Charlie Sheen, theatrics. This is what people they tune to. They turn to stuff like this because it's so controversial. I mean, it's kind of like in the Twitch sphere or the YouTube sphere. What is the content that people tune to? What's most controversial? Who's talking about who? Who slept with who? Who has, what? These people went up on, who went and had a threesome with everybody, the flying spaghetti monster. That's what people are drawn to, essentially. It's just like, you can't help but, it's kind of like watching a train crash. You just can't get enough of it, even though you're like, why am I watching this crap? It's terrible.
Yeah. There was a quote from Kevin Spacey, which is a terrible quote, but I laughed to it anyway. The quote was, and he was referencing Kevin Spacey, right? Like the accused, the victim of Kevin Spacey. He said, that boy had to hold that secret for over 20 or 30 years. Think of how long it must have taken to hold that secret. And if he had waited just 6 more months, I would have known how House of Cards ended. And that's such a terrible thing to say, right?
Yeah.
It's so terrible, but everyone low key agrees with it, right?
Yep.
Because that's the issue, right? It's the same thing. The same thing happened to Britney Spears to Justin Timberlake, right? That poor girl had cameras following her all the time, 360 days round the clock, trying to get a picture of her underwear peeking out of her jeans as she was going in, wherever she went, to the doctor's office, to the pool, to her kid's school, to travel. She couldn't go anywhere without these people hounding her over and over again. But why do they hound her? Because we want to watch it. That's why, right?
Yep.
It's because the audience, right, has an interest in seeing their hero survive, right? And to be entertained by this person on the screen more so than they do, but what is actually in the interest of justice, unfortunately, right? And that plays out with the joke about Kevin Spacey. It plays out with supporting the paparazzi's treatment of Britney Spears. And I think it probably also plays into certain people's receptions of Weinstein and of Bill Cosby, right?
And TMZ, as soon as they heard that, it's like, oh, they went batshit. They probably were hounding the victims. Because here's the thing. TMZ and the paparazzi, I tell you what, as much as I consider them vultures, they are probably some of the best press people out there because they will tell you what Gwyneth Paltrow had for breakfast on Tuesday and what time she had a bowel movement, essentially. That's the kind of stuff, if we had a press that operated like that, we would probably be the most well-informed people. But, again, I consider them vultures. They are just, there are times where I see celebrities listen, can you guys just leave me alone for 10 minutes, please? But that's what we're drawn to. And you already know that after this verdict came out, whoever's running TMZ, they were calling every single person out there. It's like, hey, listen, I need you to go get victim number 2. I want you to get her statement. I want you to find out what she's saying. And that's going to just amplify things even further. This is why it's even more disgraceful that the fact that this got overturned over technicality, because now this is just going to be a landslide of, negative effects towards the victims, essentially, and their families, too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really too bad. I really am worried, well, I'm worried and I'm not worried. So I'm worried because there will be a backlash. We're kind of in the middle of the backlash to Me Too. But I think that in the future, my hope is that there will be another uprising movement, would be my guess, right? Because that's sort of how these things go. There's the thing, there's the backlash to the thing, then there's the backlash to the backlash of the thing, and then the backlash to the backlash to the backlash to the backlash of the thing of whatever. It's what is it? Theseus's ship. It's over and over again, right? It's constantly rebuilding itself constantly over and over again. So eventually, I think we will have another Me Too movement 2.0. It's just that we're not in that time right now. We have to wait probably another 5 to 6 years before someone comes forward with another allegation. And hopefully the pendulum will start to swing back where it belongs. But we're not in that time right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, probably. It's unfortunate, though.
Yeah.
You ready to move on to the next topic?
Yeah.
All right. So, the Supreme Court at this time is hearing Trump and his legal team on his belief that he has full presidential immunity and should not be charged with or held accountable for decisions or actions that he had conducted well as president, which is, of course, laughable. You know, Trump himself has said in 2015 and 2016, while running for president, that nobody is above the law. Nobody should be above the law. Now, once again, Trump fails to understand that even as president or a former president, he is not immune from prosecution. Now, his defense team has made the argument that without presidential immunity from charges, the presidency as we know it will change forever. And he believes it'll have a direct impact on all presidential decision making. Now, Trumpers on social media believe that they can go after Trump for criminal prosecution. That leaves every American president open for prosecution. Guess what I say to that? Okay, if that means that this is going to start like a landslide of people going after other presidents that might have broken the law, I'm all for it, okay? Nobody should be immune from prosecution. But the thing is, Trump does not understand that the things that he's being charged with were not within the scope of his presidential duties, okay? For example, the possession of classified material. He is the only president in the history of the country that has ever taken documents and not returned them when NARA actually asked for them back. Every president has done it except for him. He thinks because Nixon got away with it, he should be able to, but again, he does not understand historical context regarding this. He thinks because of like the hush money case, even though it's like probably one of the weaker cases, he does not have immunity from those things. There's a lot of cases, like as of right now, they're at like 88 indictments. But he feels that he should have full presidential immunity. Now, the Supreme Court might weigh in his favor. I don't know, but that's what everybody believes is going to happen because he got so many. He got 3 Supreme Court justices during his tenure as president. Now, again, if people are so concerned that this means that they can go after any president, I say go for it. By all means, go after any president you want to. If this means that Trump is the first card to fall, I'm fine with it. Because I look at it like this. If the law means absolutely nothing to a president, then it shouldn't mean nothing to anybody. But I feel like there's always been a huge double standard. Like, for example, you can have a guy high up the food chain. He could get a DUI and he's going to get a slap on the wrist. You can have a guy that, can cause vehicular manslaughter and they'll go to probation. If I do that, I'd get the fucking book thrown at me, essentially. And honestly, I would deserve it. I would deserve that 100%. Yeah. But it happens far too often that there are some people, depending on your position of power, if you get caught with a crime, you might get a slap on the wrist. You might get probation. You might get sanctioned or something like that. But you're going to get off scot-free, essentially. That happens with politicians all the time. And we were just talking about celebrities. They get off with a slap on the wrist sometimes. But people like you and me, the average citizen, we are, like, the chances of us actually getting hammered with this, they would show us no mercy whatsoever. And I try to be as consistent as possible. And if people say, Trump had these classified documents, but what about Biden? Okay, well, they've already pretty much had that investigation on Biden. And the special prosecutor even said, okay, this wasn't malicious intent. It's way different from Donald Trump. Donald Trump actually withheld these documents and he would not give them back. The cases are not the same. But again, the people on social media that are complaining about this the most are people that don't understand the law. They think they understand the law because Trump tells them what the law is. And the thing is, Trump doesn't understand the law because the guy doesn't read. I mean, it's been proven he doesn't like to read whatsoever. What happens is people tell him, well, this is what this law means. This is what you can do. And he just accepts it, especially if he feels like you're in his inner circle. That's how he is. I mean, I've read multiple books on the guy. And when he was talking about how before January 6th, Mike Pence could send all the electors back to the states, he can't do that. Mike Pence's job on January 6th is strictly ceremonial and administrative. It's nothing official. It's just counting the ballots. That's all the electors. That's it. But because somebody told him he could do that because of some bullshit ass thing that Thomas Jefferson did in the early 1800s, it's because he doesn't understand these things. He doesn't like to read, for crying out loud. But again, I keep rambling about this, but it's just like he thinks that he should get full presidential immunity because he did nothing wrong. I highly disagree. So what are your thoughts about this, Fairy Queen?
So a couple of things. So the first one has to do with like the Biden comparison. So my understanding is the Biden thing is different, but the reason why it's different is that I think Biden's like mental capability as an acting president was called into question in that report. And like there were some specific details in the report that made that, like, one of the things that they mentioned was Biden's failing memory. He forgot like details about his own son's death, like in the middle of the interview process. One of the things they talked about regarding Biden's documents was they referenced like where they were located in the house. And They weren't stolen and locked away in some little safe, like in the office right behind a painting, right? That's not like where these documents were they found in Biden's house were. They found them in a cardboard box, in a random cardboard box, right? Not like a specially filed, do not open in 50 years, right? It was a random cardboard box that was opened, that was sitting in the garage right next to a pile of garbage and random like lawn chairs, et cetera, et cetera. That's like where they found the documents. And it was in details like that led the people like gives the impression that like Biden's like decision to like not hand over the documents or mishandling of the documents seems to be more based in mental incapabilities, right? Or like an aging fragility as opposed to like an actual point of malicious content. So it might be true that like the Biden like thing is different, right? But that's the reason why it's different. To my knowledge, like even though like Trump is in his 70s, although he is clearly getting older in age, I don't think that like his mental ability like has been questioned as of like yet. Right. So that would be like that's a key difference between like the Biden and between the Trump conversation. As far as the Trump conversation is concerned regarding like immunity, that's interesting to me. So then because so as I understand it, so claims of executive immunity. So because like he was working as acting president, that means that he's claiming immunity for his actions as president. Is that basically like what the claim is?
Yeah, that's what it is. Everything that he did is covered under the Presidential Immunity Act. Every decision he's made is within the scope of his duties, which they weren't, honestly. Like there's a lot of shady stuff that he did. I mean, don't get me wrong, every president has done something shady, but again, if this, if the house of cards starts to fall and Trump is the first one held to account and this causes other people to be held to account, I'm all for it, I'll be consistent. I mean, it doesn't matter who was president at the time. But the reason is I find this most interesting is because he is the first president that is demanding immunity. I always put it like this. If you have to demand immunity, why are you also saying you're innocent? What do you need to demand immunity from if you're innocent, if you did nothing wrong? What exactly are you? It's like if a killer goes to court, he's demanding immunity to the judge, even though he's not guilty. It's like, okay, what do you need immunity from? If you're not guilty, what crime are you do you need immunity from, essentially? And I can never get a straight answer. They're saying, oh, that George Soros is behind this. Okay, where's your proof? Oh, the proof is right in front of you. No. Where's your proof? Well, Jack Smith. Okay, what about Jack Smith? He's a shit. Okay, it's things like this. It drives me nuts. I shouldn't get involved in things like this, but I can't help it because I want to hear a good explanation from these idiots.
Well, like here's an example. So like let's supposing for a minute that like Trump came forward and he said that like he was not guilty and he pled his case in court, but then was found guilty and then took out the presidential immunity at the end, right? Do you think that would be a better strategy?
Not really.
Not really.
Not really. No. I just again I try to say that like nobody should be immune, essentially, especially if it's like not within the scope of your duties, essentially. I think there needs to be checks and balances. That's why like we have oversight, the oversight committee to like keep the checks and balances. That's why when Trump was initially impeached for his phone call with Zelensky, it's because they felt like there was something very shady going on there. And that's not within the scope of his duties, essentially. He's not supposed to be doing things. Now, it's one thing to be diplomatic, right? For example, when Obama was president and a few naval sailors sailed into Iranian waters, they got detained, nobody was hurt. John Kerry went and negotiated with them for their release, and we released some funds to Iran, okay? That's how diplomacy works. There was no blackmail involved. We just negotiated with them. What Trump did was different. Now, when they impeached him for that, they found enough reason to find that this was malicious intent. Now, the reason why he wasn't prosecuted is because certain defendants and people that worked in the administration were not allowed to come forward, essentially. But, again, this is not within the scope of his duties. His duty is not to be blackmailing other countries, essentially. Now, people are once again going to bring in Biden. Oh, well, Biden didn't blackmail anybody. He said, oh, we got rid of that prosecutor. That guy was going to be out the door anyway because there was countries everywhere that said, this guy Shokin is a shady son of a bitch. Like, we got to get rid of him, like, right away. But, I think if you have to, like, if you're like, hey, listen, this was these were in the scope of my duties. Well, I would like to know, okay, where does it say in the scope of your duties as president where you're allowed to do this? That's if that kind of answers your question.
Okay. So you said that like it became clear that like the conversation between Trump and Zelensky had malicious intent. Can you tell me like what was the malicious intent? You said blackmail?
Well, what he said is that if we're looking for dirt on Joe Biden, and if you don't give us that dirt on Joe Biden, we're not going to release any funds to you guys, like your defense fund, essentially.
Okay.
Yep. Because Alexander Vindman, who worked in the White House at the time, he actually heard this phone call, and he was the first whistleblower that came forward. After the impeachment was over with, and he was not prosecuted, Vindman and his brother were basically escorted off the premises, essentially, because he, spoke out against the president, essentially.
Yeah.
But yeah, like that's basically what the story was. Trump will insist that it was a perfectly good phone call, and he says, I did nothing wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I disagree. I disagree highly. I mean, and again, I look at it from like people might say I have TDS. Well, there's a reason for that. It's because I consider him like the worst president in my lifetime, definitely. But I just always have to go back to this is like him saying that he could basically do whatever he wants to. That basically sounds like a tyrant to me. Basically, you can do whatever you want to without any consequences whatsoever. No other president has ever asked for immunity. No other president in history has demanded immunity. Richard Nixon resigned instead of facing the consequences. He just resigned, and Gerald Ford, his successor, pardoned him, essentially. So he never really faced the consequences either. But he never asked for immunity either. He just basically got pardoned for his actions. I mean, that's just my point of view on it.
Yeah. I'm curious to see like what will happen as a consequence of this then. I wouldn't be surprised if like a lot of precedent is set with this case. It'll be interesting to see like if this lays the groundwork for presidents to have more or less executive power. I know there was an entire movie that was made about Dick Cheney that criticized like him for bolstering, the amount of executive power like nestled in the presidency.
Sure.
So it'll be curious to see like what the after effect of like Trump's presidency will be. It seems like though, like as the country continues, like that the role of the president seems to be like increasing like in terms of importance.
Mm-hmm.
There was an article I saw like just the other day in the Atlantic, and it wasn't the other day, it was like months ago actually. I'm not sure if it was the Atlantic or if it was the New Yorker. And essentially what it argued that like the role of the president so big that it's functionally impossible for anyone to actually do the job. That the job of the president, as it was imagined like in 1776, is nothing what the job of what it means to be the president in 2024, right?
Sure.
I mean, like in 1776, like to be the president, I mean, yes, you are the leader of the country, right? But you're essentially the governor of 13 different states, right? That's like what it meant to be the president, like initially, right? You were the leader of a ragtag, group of mismatched colonies, off the shore of a continent that like most of the rest of the world had never even visited yet. That's like what it meant to be. In 2024, it is the number one position and number one thing you can be, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's, modern day king or glorified bureaucrat, right? Like that's the classic discussion about like what it means to be the president. So
certainly,
I'll be interested. Like I think that we have to see like what the Supreme Court's response is to this, like before like we can make any like firm like or like statements like about this. We just know that a hearing is coming up soon.
Yeah, they're already hearing the arguments right now, so I don't know how long it's going to take them to make this decision. For the time being, I don't have much faith in them, probably because like I feel a couple of them are compromised heavily. One of them being Clarence Thomas, because Clarence Thomas is a guy that the Supreme Court is one of the few branches where they can actually receive gifts. And their decisions can actually weigh heavily. Like John Oliver did a bit on it on Last Week Tonight. He covered the entire thing about the Supreme Court justices and talked about how Clarence Thomas is basically has billionaires and billionaires that always gift him like, cruises, vacations, things like that. And every time like they've needed their cases to come before the Supreme Court, he's ruled in favor of them. So I feel like they're compromised. Yeah. I feel like he's compromised because his own wife on January 6th supported the people that were storming the Capitol, and he was asked to recuse himself, and he didn't. I feel like he is a compromised Supreme Court justice. And people can have their opinion about all the other Supreme Court justices, and I'm willing to hear them out, but he's the one I'm concerned about. Simply because, like, I feel like he's not principled. He's heavily biased. Now, the Supreme Court is not necessarily supposed to be like a political appointment. Like, they're not supposed to be elected because they're conservative. They're supposed to be like the best interpreters of the Constitution and the law. Some of them are, some of them are not. I also think it should not be a lifetime appointment. The argument about Ruth Bader Ginsburg being on there really compromised the seating in the Supreme Court. I'm inclined to agree about that. She was a great trailblazer. She did a lot for women's rights, essentially. But some believe that she just was there for far too long. And, same thing could be happening for Congress and for, senators. They could be there for years, decades even. And I think that's absurd. That, like, there needs to be a term limits for that and term limits for the Supreme Court, I think. That's my opinion, though.
I don't know that I agree. I think that there is something good about the idea of having somebody that has a lifelong commitment to the Supreme Court, though, right? Because, like, that means that, because if you have, like, it on a voting system, right, where they are elected to go to the Supreme Court, or they're only appointed for like 10 or 15 years, right? That means that like the status of whether or not somebody is a Supreme Court justice and the decisions that are made is therefore more based upon like the politics of the day, right? Because at the end of the day, as much as we wish it were otherwise, the person that nominates, the Supreme Court justices are ultimately going to be presidents. Sure. And their, election will absolutely be political and highly partisan. So the best way probably to mitigate partisanship, like regarding the Supreme Court, is probably to make sure that, like, when a justice is selected, that they are installed there for as long as is possible, right? To try to avoid and to try to mitigate, some looping of partisanship over and over and over again.
Sure. I think, like, medical complications is like should be like a definite, like, cutoff right there, because we saw what happened with Senator Dianne Feinstein. I know she wasn't a Supreme Court justice, but she was a senator from California for decades. It got to the point where she couldn't even do her duties anymore, but she still held the seat. Like, things like that, there has to be like, okay, I'm sorry, but you can't do this anymore. So,
yeah.
Well, you ready to move on to your last topic?
Absolutely. All right. Let me scroll on up. So this one, guys, it's about O.J. Simpson, okay? I hinted at this earlier, okay? So O.J. Simpson's cause of death is revealed. The former NFL running back died on April 10th, 76 years old in Las Vegas, okay? And this has just come out. This was just yesterday, like April 26, 2024, okay? So his cause of death was revealed as prostate cancer this week. His lawyer confirmed to Fox News Digital on Friday. The controversial former athlete and actor, who was acquitted of his wife's murder in 1995, died on April 10th. Simpson, who was 76 when he died, announced that he had been diagnosed with a disease last year. So his longtime lawyer, Malcolm Laverne, told Fox News Digital Simpson's death certificate that he died of metastatic prostate cancer. There was a private gathering of friends and relatives. No public memorial was planned, and he was cremated in Vegas. Okay, so that's just like the cliff notes of it. Most the rest of it is largely pretty boring at the time. But I dropped this in because I wanted to talk about like the trials that like we've been seeing, like, because I feel like this was at one point one of the biggest televised trials in history. It was a huge deal. So much so that people were talking about it 10 years after like it had finished, right? It had been so branded and burned into our brains. So now recently, like in the past few years, we've had the Bill Cosby case, we've had the Harvey Weinstein case, we've had the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case, and it seems as though we're in this cycle, right? We are in this pattern constantly of having these big name celebrities who are accused of sexual misconduct, who are accused of violence, or who are accused of violence against women, who are accused of doing terrible things. and it becomes this huge, giant cultural phenomenon that we all stare at, right?
Yeah.
And this sort of sets the bar for how we deal with violence against women, how we discuss race, how we discuss sexism, how we discuss sexual violence, et cetera, et cetera. And so I found this case to be really, really interesting. I'd like to kind of rehash what we thought about OJ a little bit.
Hmm.
What do you think about OJ? What were your thoughts at the time? What are your thoughts now? Do you think he was guilty?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Like, he had a history of domestic violence towards Nicole Simpson. Like, there was even a 911 phone call talking about like how I need the police here, or else he's going to beat the shit out of me. Like, he was very,
Yeah.
it was very evident. Now, there was a lot of theories about how he did it, but then they showed like a computer animation of like what possibly could have happened, and I think the one that was most plausible, I can't remember the name of the other guy, Goldman, whatever his name was, like, was it Ron Goldman or something like that? Well,
Yeah.
what people think what happened was it was the middle of the night, and he was getting rid of the body, like O.J. Simpson was getting rid of the body, and Ron Goldman stumbled upon it, and he chased him down and killed him, like, right there. Like, I think that's most likely what happened. That would make the most sense, essentially. I can't prove it. Nobody can prove it, essentially. But it's just like the pattern just seems to be there. But however, the burden of proof is on the prosecution. They're the ones that are supposed to prove that these things happen. Like, we know Casey Anthony killed her daughter. We know this for a fact. But it's just because the prosecution couldn't prove it. They were unable to prove their case, essentially. So she was found not guilty. I'm not blaming the jury. The jury is supposed to be, that's why jury selection's important. You have to make sure that you get rid of the jurors that are going to be biased in any way, shape, or form. When it comes down to like O.J. Simpson, like, I don't know what caused it, and like when it comes down to domestic violence, especially like with football players, that's been like a real rampant pickup, and the reason why that is because of like TBI, CTE, where the collision with helmets could be like a switch that gets flipped, and we've been seeing a lot of that lately. Maybe that was the cause of it. I don't know. We can't predict these things. I think like when it comes down to O.J. Simpson, though, again, I can't prove that he did these things. I'm not going to say whether he did or didn't do it, but it just seems most likely. I know I said, yeah, I do believe he did do it, but I'm not, on the record kind of deal. But it's just, it just seems like it's most likely that he did, because I don't know like how his children feel about it. I'm not going to bring them up. I mean, no, they're all adults right now, but it's just, when you hear the domestic violence, like, when you watch the documentary, did they play some of the audio from the phone calls from Nicole Simpson?
I don't remember if they did or not. No.
It's pretty troubling, because I've watched a lot of footage of like domestic violence, and it's just the patterns are all there. It's not like, and plus she was seen quite a few times with bruises all over her face and things like that. So I have no doubt that took place. And it's not too far out of the realm of things. A few years later, though, he actually tried to steal his Heisman Trophy and other awards, and he went to prison for that for a few years. Then he got released. I think the thing that kind of like really, I wouldn't say I scratched my head at that, because people are fucking stupid, I think. I would say this all the time, because there was like this fanfare of O.J. Simpson, but I also have to remember that like there was that guy that Watts, who killed his entire family, and there are women that write him in prison, says, I think you're a fantastic human being. I love you so much. It's like, it's batshit craziness, honestly. And I think the same fanfare is because it's O.J. Simpson, one of the most famous people to ever go to prison in the history of this country. It's the fanfare that comes from it. I don't think we should be celebrating people like this, but that's not for me to decide, though. It's just my personal opinion. I just think that with O.J. Simpson, this is just rehashing everything. I just feel like the documentary has probably got a lot more viewership because of his passing. I'm sure more people are talking about it nowadays. And like you said, it's the thing that we're just drawn to the most. The most controversial case in our nation's history so far. O.J. Simpson, because I think it was the start of it all, essentially. Because we had other celebrities, but I think his is definitely one of the most high profile, because it went on for like a year. I think the trial went on for like about a year and a half or so, I think. I can't remember.
Yeah. It was something. One of the things that I find to be the reason I absolutely think he did it too, but the thing that really like pulled me over was the DNA evidence, which nobody understood at the time. At the time, nobody knew, like, really understood like the gravity, like how important that evidence was, and how like distributed his blood was. Like, it was everywhere. Like, it was on the parking lot, it was like down like the backyard, it was smeared like across the crime scene, right? It absolutely had to have been him. Now, we say that in hindsight, right? Like, I don't know if like the people in 1996 like could have known that or would have understood that like at the time because of how new that type of evidence was. But that's the reason why I think he did it. Like, the DNA evidence is like it's too damning. And there's the fact that he took which is not as damning because like lie detector tests aren't really foolproof, right? They don't really detect lies. But they definitely detected something, right? And combined with the DNA evidence on top of that, right? He wickedly flunked, the lie detector test. Like, and not just a little bit, right? It was, but like by a lot, right? He like really, really flunked it. And then you later find out that there is this history of domestic violence. There is this history of him becoming jealous, with her, referencing other men. There is the issue of the pictures of her, like with bruises. And the biggest issue of all, which is the blood splattered everywhere with his DNA, like all across the backyard. That's that, and I think that that's pretty like solid, pretty solid reason to believe that he did it. And there's also, frankly, his attitude afterwards. He wrote a whole book, and it was titled "If I Did It," but the "if" is like really, really small, and then "I did it" is in huge letters, like on the front of that. Like, he absolutely used his own murder of his wife to make money for himself. He used it as a marketing scheme. Like, after he like with the civil trial, that when Nicole Simpson's parents sued him directly afterwards, in civil court. So it's just kind of gross, right? I wonder what we make of all these celebrity trials. I think it's different today. Have you ever seen Chicago?
Chicago, the musical?
Yeah, the musical. Yeah, the musical,
Years and
right?
years
Because
ago.
that's yeah. Well, like in the musical, right? They have like, it's about a celebrity murder, right? It's about these women who have murdered people, right? And they become celebrities from it. That's the whole point of the show, right? Like, they're doing numbers on the stage, right? They have this kind of 1920s not really Harlem Renaissance, but kind of Harlem Renaissance kind of a thing going on, right? They have jazz playing. They have women with really short hair. It's the whole thing. It's meant to be like fabulous when you watch, right? And one of the main points of the show is that these women become celebrities because they are murderers. So they spin the spectacle of the trial, right, into making themselves into bigger and bigger stars. And I wonder if that's like what's been happening recently. I wonder if that will sadly, I think that will continue to happen. But it's interesting because in a way, like, the kind of like that kind of happened recently with Gypsy Rose, like when she recently like left prison.
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
yeah, do you like, she left prison, and after she left prison, first of all, she said that she was going to be married. She was engaged. And so she and her fiance, were interviewed. They talked about love. She talked about all of the letters that she received while she was in jail. And now Gypsy Rose is no longer dating him, right? Has dumped him sadly and is moving forward with her life, right?
Yep.
So it's a similar dynamic, right? But the difference is, like, do we feel badly about this? It feels wrong, right? When someone like O.J. Simpson turns, like this murder, like his murder of his ex-wife, into, this money-making scheme for himself. But then we have somebody like Gypsy Rose, who was tortured, and abused, medically abused for most of her life. And now she is turning and twisting what happened to her into sort of a money-making, celebrity fame-seeking sort of a spiel. Do we feel differently about these two different subjects? Do you think they are different?
I would say they're very different, honestly, because, like, even though we can definitely say, like, was the way that she went about like murdering her mother correct? Probably not. But at the same time, it's just kind of like she felt she had no other option. That was her only way of escaping her. That's what I gathered from that situation. And again, I'm sure there are other ways she could have dealt with it, but we can Monday morning quarterback all day long. But we're talking about O.J. Simpson being the aggressor. She is the victim of this crime, essentially. I mean, like, if a man is being attacked by another man and he beats that man to death, obviously we're going to side with him, essentially. Now, some people are like, oh, well, he probably went too far. Well, he probably did go too far, but the thing is, his life was in danger. So it's a very subjective case,
Yeah.
essentially. It has to be dealt on a case-by-case basis. Do I feel like she should have been sentenced for the crime? At the time, they went with the evidence they had, essentially. So I wouldn't say it was so much of a miscarriage of justice. I just think it's like that's what they ruled upon. And now people are saying, well, she never should have got sent to prison in the first place. Well, I haven't really looked too much into it, but that's just what the justice system at the time went with.
Yeah.
I think because she suffered at the hands of her mother. Like, that's something that I found out, that she really was a victim. And do I think that she should be able to capitalize on this? I think she can, yes, because, like, maybe this could be a lesson to others. Like, there are other ways of handling this situation. There are ways that you can get out of this, and maybe that's what I don't know if that's what she's trying to do. I mean, if she's trying to teach people like how you can actually get yourself out of this situation. I don't know. I haven't seen too much into it though. But like the OJ route, no, there is nothing ever.
Yeah.
Nothing ever excuses that. I always hear the excuses like, well, I wonder what she did to piss him off. It's like, I don't fucking care, okay? That, like, I don't care if she said, you know, your mom looks fat in those pants, essentially. Violence is never the answer. You know, the only time, like, a man should ever strike a woman if she's about to kill him for him doing something, for him not doing it. Like, if a woman's attacking me, yeah, I'm going to defend myself, okay? But I'm only going to use the right amount of force necessary. But, like, the way he treated Nicole, no. I'm sorry. That's way, way, way different. Nicole Simpson was the victim. O.J. Simpson was not.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I guess I ask because I wonder, right? Like, because I would agree with you, and nominally, right? It feels good, just putting like, you know, we're logic braining, you know, whether it's right or wrong, right? But it just feels a gut feeling of good, right? To see somebody who was aggressed on, who killed someone in self-defense, to be able to turn this horrible situation into an actual livelihood for themselves, right? Like when I look at Gypsy Rose, I don't feel a lick bad about the idea of her making tons of money off of the documentary and off of the movies, the television series that was based, and every interview that she has. Based off of what I know about her, I'm like, you know what? God bless you, okay? I hope you make tons and tons of money from this, and this never happens to you again, right? Like, I get that, right? But what I wonder is, like, as a principle, right? Like, when something bad happens to you, right? When a tragic thing, maybe not a tragic thing, if you do something terrible, actually, that's probably better, right? If you do something that's objectively terrible, right? A horrible atrocity, right? Is it just immoral on the face of it for you to make money off of it? Like, regardless of whether you were justified in doing the atrocity or not, right? Like, should Oppenheimer get a book deal out of, like, making the atom bomb? Is it moral for him to accept interviews and for him to become, right, I don't know, what is it? Like, the father of nuclear physics, to be known as that, right? Because he created the bomb. Is that something he morally should accept? Should Gypsy Rose accept this? It feels good, right? I like that she's getting it, but is it good, right? Is it good for her to be receiving this? I don't like the idea of O.J. Simpson, but the flip side of this is, right? If we say that there's nothing nominally bad with it, right? Well, then that means that O.J. Simpson gets to have his multi-million-dollar press deal just as much as Gypsy Rose does, right?
Yeah.
I wonder like that. Like, what do you think? Do you think like it's ever?
I can't really say it's good or bad. It's just the way the market works. I mean, like, the marketing is there, especially like you hit on it earlier, like with OJ's book. If I did it, you know, that's what catches people's attention. That's what sells, essentially. Gypsy's story could be worded exactly the same way. It's going to get people's attention. They already know her story. But how do you add some pizzazz? How do you add some panache to the editing, to the story and stuff like that? That's what gets people to watch it.
Yeah.
Now, should people market off of it? Why not? I say people should be able to. Like, you've got people that write books from prison, essentially, telling their story. I mean, we're talking about guys that, like, you know, rob banks, and they write stories like all the time, if I'm not mistaken. Should they be able to? Sure. I don't see why not. If you don't want to buy it, if you don't want to read it, don't. It's that simple. But I think why it might be good, right? Say, for example, you have a serial killer. he writes a book about his entire life. He talks about like, well, the reason I did this is because it's my cat Dash. Because like,
Hi, Dash.
yep, she's my sweet girl. It because like the serial killer writes, well, because a relative I once knew molested me at one point, and then I took my aggression out on small animals, and then after I did that, I was picked on and bullied at school. Then I beat the hell out of a kid, and I got grounded, and I got abused by my parents. Like, it could actually help psychiatrists, psychologists, people like that, understand getting into the mind of a killer kind of deal, like of somebody that actually experienced these things. That's why it could be good. At the same time, you could always have those copycats that could read this like and get inspiration from it. It's really kind of hard to say whether people should or shouldn't. It's kind of like that question is like, just because you can doesn't always mean you should. I see the good and the bad in all of it. And now she keeps knocking my webcam over. She wants attention. But does that kind of make sense? So it's like, I wouldn't say it's neither good or bad. It's just kind of like, it really depends on the person and the scenario.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, for like, I mean, you're right. Like, in terms of judging other people, it might be difficult, right? And more, but I mean, just like as a principle for ourselves, right? Like when we are creator, I like to think I'm a content creator. I play one on TV, right? Like it's something for us to think about too, and for like our viewers, like as they go through their lives, right? Now, I don't, unless maybe one of you will get lucky, right? I don't think anybody here is the next Hollywood, big name star, right? But you never know, right?
Yeah.
But this is something that like we could probably take a leaf out of, like, and put in our own books, right?
Certainly.
Like what should we do? Like, because I would hope nobody has been through like something extremely horrific and, traumatizing. I hope that's not true for you or for anyone else watching, right? But like, okay, something bad happens to you, right? Is there something morally seedy if we try to turn that into a business enterprise, right? If we try to take the bad thing that happened to us or a bad thing that we did, right, which is the flip side of it, and we try to turn it into we turn it into a money-making scheme, right? Or not even just a money-making scheme, but we turn it into some kind of like piece of art or a product, right? Or we turn it into a vocation of some sort. Is there something bad about that? What do you think?
I'd say no. It's not bad because to take something that bad happened to you, like if you choose not to do that, that's also your decision. But I think some people do it as a means of closure as well. The serial killers, I think it's more about not just closure, but it's like maybe self-realization, or like they just want to toot their own horns maybe. Again, I wouldn't say it's bad though. I've read quite a few books, right, of people telling their story, and I find them very enlightening at times. I feel like you learn so much about the person. You actually see things from their perspective, and it kind of changes your there's a book about the foster care system called Hope's Boy. It was written by the guy that is now a lawyer. He specializes in children that are in the foster care system. He shared his own experiences of his mother, who had him at a very young age, and like what he went through in a foster care system. And it's not a very popular book, I'm sure, but it's still a very, very important story to read about. Cassidy Hutchinson, she wrote a book about called Enough. Talks about her time working on the Trump administration, what happened on January 6th, why she came to testify. It's because it gives her closure. And I feel like she deserves to make as much money as she can. Do serial killers make a dime off that? I don't know. If they're still in prison, probably not. But at that point, it's just, I wouldn't say it's bad. I mean, it's very subjective though. It really kind of also depends on the reader. Now, if people draw inspiration from that and try to, take their aggression out, then yeah, obviously that might be a problem. But, you can make the same argument of making movies, documentaries. You got family members coming out saying we shouldn't be doing Jeffrey Dahmer documentaries because this just adds like a flair, or it makes it seem like we're romanticizing this idea. And I see their point. Regarding that.
Yeah. The Dahmer documentary series was controversial for that reason. There were a lot of people, like after like the documentary series was released, who were critical of it, and they were critical of it because they were worried that it glorified Dahmer's torture and murder of the men that he like brought back to his apartment.
Yep. Absolutely. And I definitely see their point about that. I mean, I just didn't watch it because it's not really my thing. But there are some people that are all about it. They want to watch stuff like that, which is fine. I mean, you know, that's just the way books, TV series, that they're out there to make money. That's the main goal. Tell your story. This is what some people find fascinating, though. So,
absolutely.
But anyway, I know you got another show that you got to jump on next. Was there anything else you wanted to like cover before you went, or were you good?
Not at all. Not at all. Thank you so much, Alex. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. Go ahead and just let everybody know what panel you're going to go on to next and where they can find you to close this thing out.
Hi guys. You can find me at Fairy Queen's Cottage on YouTube, and you can find me at Fairy Quadruple _Queen on Twitter. Please go ahead and check me out. Thank you so much. And you can usually find me on Prime Caius's The Reverie every Monday at 8 p.m. And I will be there this upcoming week. Tonight we're not streaming. I'm going on to a recorded show after this. But you can find like my other show that I'm doing tonight from Corey Campbell. I'm assuming he's going to be posting it pretty soon. Thank you so much, Alex. I really, really loved our conversation tonight.
Oh, yeah.
I hope you enjoyed it too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love conversations like this. I mean, you know, it may not have flair, but I just feel like it's good to have conversations like this because it might be something you didn't even think about talking about, you know. But I always find conversations like this really fascinating, interesting, and I just really enjoy input from other people. I mean, I feel like it's good to like let the guest come on and say, this is what I want to talk about. I find that interesting and fascinating. So thank you so much for your topics tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alex. You guys have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Right, thank you.
Y'all have a great evening and have a great weekend. Take care.
Bye.